I still remember the night it happened, the night I stopped trusting my own memories. It was past midnight in my lab at the university. The only light came from the computer screens and the soft blue glow of the scanner. I was testing the newest version of our software, Memory Restore 3.0. It's a program designed to reconstruct lost images using fragments of old photographs and neural data. Most of the time, the results were blurry faces or half-finished rooms, never anything more than ghosts of what once was. That evening, I received a new client request. A woman wanted me to restore a family album from 1985 so she could see her mother again. There was nothing unusual about it. I loaded the files into the system, entered the metadata, and waited for the algorithm to process the image. The printer started humming, the sound steady and mechanical, almost like a heartbeat. The progress bar on the screen crawled slowly across the bottom, 10%, 40, 90. Then, finally, the first photograph appeared. When I saw it, I stopped breathing. At first, my brain couldn't register what it was seeing. There was a woman in the center of the image, wearing a pale blue dress and standing beside a man and a small boy. The colors were faded, the edges slightly burned, but the faces were clear. Painfully clear. The woman was me, not someone who looked vaguely like me. It was me, my mouth, my posture, the way my left shoulder always tilts slightly forward. Even the scar under my eye, the one I got in graduate school, was there. And the strangest part was the date written on the bottom of the photo. 1985. And that couldn't be right. In 1985, I was 24 years old and had just started my research career. I wasn't married then. I didn't even know the man who was standing beside me in the picture. And yet, there I was, smiling, one hand resting on a little boy's shoulder. Below the image, written in the same font the software usually uses for restored captions, were the words, Mother of the Year, 1985, Dr. Eleanor Price. I read it once, then again. Then again, slower this time, as if maybe the letters would rearrange themselves into something logical. But they didn't. My name was right. My handwriting even looked familiar. But the rest, the family, the date, the title, none of it had ever happened. For a moment, the lab felt completely silent, except for the faint buzz of the fluorescent light above me. My palms were sweating. I felt my throat tighten as I reached out to touch the monitor, half expecting the woman in the photo to move. The glass was cold under my fingers. My reflection trembled against hers, and I couldn't tell which one of us was real. Then the printer came to life again, spitting out more pages, more pictures. In every one of them there I was, sometimes older, sometimes younger, but always with that same man and the same child, always smiling, always a mother. It made no sense. I sat down and tried to slow my breathing. I'd spent 20 years studying memory distortion, helping victims of trauma recover lost fragments of their past. I understood false memory better than anyone, but this wasn't a glitch. The software couldn't invent new people. It worked from real data. Someone, somewhere, had uploaded a file that contained me. My face. My name. My entire identity, inserted into a life that wasn't mine. For the first time in my career, I was afraid of the thing I'd built. I opened the metadata of the image and scrolled through the source information. There it was, a user ID I didn't recognize, and a timestamp from 3 weeks ago. Whoever had submitted it had access to our internal server, something only my research team and a handful of government clients could do. I whispered into the empty lab, barely hearing my own voice. "Who the hell are you?" No one answered. The screen flickered slightly, and for a split second, I thought I saw my reflection blink out of sync with me. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself. Exhaustion. A glitch. But the feeling stayed. That strange electric pulse of being watched by your own image. I turned off the scanner, but the hum of the machine seemed to echo long after the power went down. That night, as I drove home through the empty streets of Chicago, the caption burned in my head. Mother of the Year, 1985. Dr. Eleanor Price. It wasn't just an error in the system. It felt like a message. one that only I was meant to see. And deep down, beneath the logic and the science, I felt something colder than fear, a sense that this photograph wasn't showing me a lie. It was showing me a memory I was never supposed to remember. I built a machine to recover the past, but someone, somewhere, had used it to rewrite me. My name is Dr. Eleanor Price. On paper, I'm a clinical psychologist with a PhD in cognitive neuroscience. In reality, I'm a cartographer of false memories. For more than 2 decades, I have studied the ways our minds fabricate the past and then swear by its authenticity. I built my career on restoring other people's truths. When the police wanted to reconstruct the blurred face of a missing child from a 30-year-old photograph, they called me. When prosecutors needed to test whether a witness had actually seen what she swore she had seen, they called me. My software pulled shapes out of grainy pixels, turned fragments into portraits, and helped to convict kidnappers or free the wrongly accused. That was the public story. The private one was much smaller. After my divorce, I stopped taking photographs of myself. My ex-husband used to tease me about it, saying a scientist who reconstructs faces ought to enjoy being in front of a camera. But I didn't. I lived alone in a loft on the north side of Chicago, surrounded by servers and hard drives instead of family pictures. People at conferences called me Ice Queen Price, and I never felt the need to correct them. Being cold meant being clear. Every morning before work, I performed the same small ritual. In the corner of my apartment, propped on an antique tripod, stood a device of my own invention, the memory mirror. It looked like an ordinary mirror framed in brushed steel, but embedded behind the glass were a grid of microsensors. When I leaned close, it scanned the micro-movements of my face and projected them back as a composite of all my previous scans. I designed it to show patients how memories of their own expressions shift over time. For them, it was therapy. For me, it became a kind of penance. Each morning, I would wipe a cloth across the glass to clear the dust, watch the sensors flicker awake, and see not one reflection, but hundreds. Versions of me at 20, at 30, at 45, all looking back at once. Sometimes the younger ones smiled. Cool. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes I couldn't tell which version I was standing in front of. It had started as a scientific tool. It had turned into a confessional. I never let anyone else look at it. The first time I realized how deeply my work had changed me was 5 years ago, when I helped the police reconstruct the image of a girl who had gone missing in 1991. We pieced her together from school photos, eyewitness sketches, and a few seconds of degraded videotape. When the final composite appeared on the screen, the detective whispered, "That's her." But what chilled me wasn't the resemblance to the missing girl. It was the resemblance to myself. I told myself it was coincidence. The algorithm learned from my face because my face was the one it saw most often during testing. I was feeding myself into the machine every day. So of course I started to show up in its ghosts. Still, the image stayed with me. After my marriage ended, I threw myself even harder into research. I stopped teaching. I stopped returning calls from my sister. At the lab, people lowered their voices when I walked past. They thought I was obsessed. Maybe I was. I was hunting something I couldn't name. The moment when a memory stops being memory and becomes invention. The memory mirror became my only confidant. It recorded thousands of my micro-expressions, building a library of Eleanor Prices across decades. I told myself it was just data. But sometimes, late at night, when the apartment was quiet, I could swear one of the versions blinked before I did. I kept a notebook of small details from my own life. Dates, places, things I had done. It was a habit I developed working with trauma survivors, teaching them to anchor themselves in time. Write it down, I always said, so no one can tell you it didn't happen. In my own pages, I listed 1983, graduated from Northwestern. 1985, began internship at the Center for Cognitive Imaging. 1986, first patent application for image reconstruction algorithm. 1992, married Thomas Price. 2001, divorced, no children. Each entry ended with a small box. I could tick when I found corroborating evidence. A photograph, a letter, a date stamp. It was my personal insurance policy against forgetting. I thought it was airtight. When the photograph appeared on my screen, the one of me in a blue dress with a man and a child, all of those anchors came loose. 1985 wasn't supposed to look like that. I was supposed to be a graduate student in a cramped lab, not a mother of the year with a smiling boy. The worst part wasn't seeing my own face. It was recognizing the smile. It was mine, but it belonged to a memory I didn't own. That night after I left the lab, I went home and stood in front of the memory mirror. My reflection flickered into a grid of younger selves. 24-year-old Eleanor looked back at me, her eyes bright, her mouth curved in exactly the same way as the woman in the photograph. I reached out and touched the glass. "Who are you?" I whispered. The sensors hummed softly, mapping my skin. In the composite, the younger Eleanor raised her hand too. For an instant, it looked as if she were about to step through the surface. I shut the device off. The room went dark. That was my life before the photograph. A life of clean data, isolated work, and a mirror full of ghosts I thought I could control. Now, with that single restored image, everything I had built, my research, my identity, my memory, had begun to feel like evidence in a case I didn't know I was part of. In 1985, I was 24 and working as an intern at the Center for Facial Recognition Research in Boston. It was the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and warm plastic, where the air hummed with the sound of mainframes breathing. Back then, the word algorithm still felt new, like a magic spell that only a handful of people could pronounce correctly. I didn't have money or influence, but I had something rarer at that age: access. My mentor, Professor Halpern, believed that the human face was the most unstable code in nature. We were trying to teach machines to read it the way poets read emotion, at a time. One afternoon, while Halpern was at a conference, I stayed late to process a batch of volunteer images. The datasets were primitive photographs scanned from glossy prints, each tagged with coordinates marking the eyes, mouth, and jawline. I remember typing command lines while the rain hit the lab windows in thin silver needles. At some point the software froze, then restarted itself. When the composite image appeared on the monitor, I gasped and almost spilled my coffee. The program had glitched and blended the faces of 3 volunteers into one. It was haunting: a woman's mouth on a man's jaw, a child's eyes hovering above them both. The face wasn't grotesque, it was almost beautiful, in an impossible way. It looked human enough to be familiar, but different enough to feel wrong, like seeing your reflection smile before you do. When Halpern returned, I showed him the image. He laughed, proud of the mistake. "It's the future, Eleanor," he said. "A perfect average of imperfection." I remember laughing too, though the sound came out tight. I joked, "If human memory ever malfunctions like this, we'll have a lot of explaining to do." He replied, "Give it 40 years, and maybe you'll be the one to fix it." I didn't realize then that 40 years later, that joke would come for me. That night, I printed the composite and pinned it above my desk. I wrote across the bottom corner, "Error 147, average face." For weeks afterward, I would glance at it between experiments. Sometimes, in the low light of the lab, the features seemed to rearrange themselves. Subtle shifts, as if the face were learning from me. I was too young to be superstitious. I thought I was witnessing the birth of a new era in imaging, not the first crack in the boundary between data and self. When the internship ended, Halpern offered me a permanent position. I declined. I wanted to move on to clinical psychology, to understand the people behind the pixels. He shook my hand and said, "Don't let the machines learn too much about you, Eleanor." I laughed again. Everyone laughed in that lab. We thought we were playing with harmless ghosts. I kept the print when I moved to Chicago. Over the years, the paper yellowed, the ink bled at the edges, but the face stayed almost intact. I never scanned it into any of my later systems, partly out of nostalgia, partly out of something else I didn't admit. I was afraid of what the software might recognize. Sometimes, when I looked at that old composite, I imagined the 3 volunteers living their separate lives, unaware that pieces of them had fused into a 4th person, a digital phantom waiting in a folder named Archive 1985. Now, decades later, as I stare at the photograph that calls me Mother of the Year, 1985, I think about that phantom. The symmetry, the slight tilt of the mouth. It's the same pattern. The same alignment I saw on that flickering CRT screen 40 years ago. Maybe the glitch never really went away. Maybe it learned my face through every scan, every calibration, every reflection in the memory mirror. Back then, when the lights in the lab turned off automatically at midnight, I used to sit in the dark and watch the monitor glow, whispering to the face on the screen like it could hear me. I'd say things like, "Don't worry, you're not real," and feel a twinge of guilt for saying it. Now I wonder if, somewhere in the billions of archived images floating through networks and servers, that hybrid face found me again and decided to finish what it started. In 1985, I had laughed at the idea of memory making mistakes. 40 years later, I'm living inside one. A few weeks before the night I found the photograph, I received an email that I almost deleted without opening. The subject line simply read, "Thank you for giving me life." The message itself was short. No attachments, no links, no phishing scam hidden behind it. Just one sentence written in a polite, almost tender tone. "Thank you for bringing me into this world, Mom." No name, no signature. I assumed it was spam. After all, my university address appeared on dozens of public research pages. People wrote to me all the time. Students seeking internships, patients hoping I could fix their memories, conspiracy theorists insisting that memory manipulation was part of a government plot. But this message was different. There was no demand, no agenda. Just gratitude. It felt too quiet to be malicious. Still, I deleted it, emptied the trash, and forgot about it. 3 days later, it came again. Same words, same font, same timestamp pattern down to the minute. The only thing that had changed was the sender's name. E.O. Price. Price. My last name. At first, I laughed, an odd, humorless sound that startled even me. It wasn't unusual for people to mimic my surname online. There had been fake accounts before. But this time, something in the pit of my stomach tightened. That night, I searched through my genealogy files, an old obsession of mine. My father's line was Welsh, my mother's Irish. Nowhere in the record did a Daniel appear. I had no brothers, no sons, no nephews. I didn't answer the email. Instead, I traced the IP address habit, not curiosity. It pointed to a residential server in Milwaukee. Nothing about it seemed remarkable. But the thought lingered. Someone out there was writing to me like a child to his mother, and somehow he thought he was telling the truth. For a few days, the lab work drowned out the unease. Memory. Restore 3.0 was nearing its final testing phase, and I was buried in neural pattern data. When I looked up from the screen after hours of coding, the city outside had already turned to black glass. One evening, while reviewing old datasets to compare accuracy rates, I noticed a stray folder inside the 1980s archives, one I didn't remember creating. Its label read simply, Daniel. My first instinct was to assume it belonged to one of my graduate assistants. The interns often stored temporary test files before the system purge. Still, something about the folder name made my throat dry. Inside were 12 subfiles, each containing a low-resolution facial composite, a boy aging year by year, from infancy to adolescence. In every picture, the same subtle pattern of features appeared. The curve of the jaw, the set of the eyes, and, disturbingly, the faint resemblance to my own face. At first, I tried to rationalize it. The AI sometimes borrowed facial ratios from its training data. Since my scans populated the system for years, pieces of my anatomy could easily appear in synthetic images. But the metadata told a different story. Every file had been modified in the past month by a user ID listed as ePriceAdmin01, my own credentials. That was impossible. I hadn't touched those datasets in years. I called the IT department the next morning, pretending it was a routine security check. The technician ran a brief scan and assured me the system showed no external breach. "Probably a sync bug," he said, smiling through the video call. I nodded, but my hands were sweating beneath the desk. That night, I powered up the memory mirror in my apartment. I told myself I was just checking calibration. The surface brightened, scattering the light across the walls. For a moment, everything looked normal, until I noticed that the mirror's display lagged by half a second. I blinked, my reflection didn't. The delay was subtle but real, a ripple between me and the glass. When I stepped closer, the sensors seemed to pulse faster, almost as if the mirror were trying to anticipate me instead of follow me. I whispered my own name just to fill the silence. Eleanor Price. The reflection's lips moved a fraction too late. I turned off the device, unplugged it, and sat in the dark until the city lights outside began to fade into dawn. I told myself it was exhaustion, a feedback loop, nothing more. But by morning, a third message waited in my inbox. Don't be afraid, Mom. You built me. Daniel. That was the moment the unease turned into fear. Because the timestamp on that email matched exactly down to the second, the time I had looked into the mirror and said my own name. The morning after that third message, I gave up pretending this was a glitch. I needed proof. At the university, we had access to the National Identity Database, an encrypted archive used mostly for law enforcement cross-checks and historical research. I had clearance as part of a federal grant on biometric ethics. I'd never used it for anything personal, but that day my fingers typed on instinct. Search. Daniel Price. The system processed for several seconds before the results appeared. There were 12 Daniel Prices registered nationwide, but only one matched the date that had haunted every file in my lab. Born 1985. When I opened the profile, my stomach clenched so hard I thought I might be sick. Mother, Eleanor Price. Occupation, neural memory. Reconstruction scientist. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. I scrolled down to the photo attached to the record. A woman holding a newborn, smiling at the camera. It was me. Not a look-alike, not a morph. The same mole near my lip. The same hospital bracelet I used to wear when I interned at the Boston Center for Facial Recognition. In the image, I looked 24, exactly the age I had been when that faulty composite was created. The timestamp on the metadata said May 12, 1985. The day before my 25th birthday. I printed the file. The machine rattled and hissed, dragging the paper out inch by inch. My hand trembled so badly, the ink smeared when I grabbed it, bleeding red across the page like a wound reopening. I stared at my younger self, frozen in a life I'd never lived. If this was a prank, it was the cruelest I'd ever seen. If it wasn't? If the record was genuine, then someone had used my data to manufacture a human being and wrap him in government paperwork as real as my own birth certificate. I spent the rest of the morning tearing through digital archives. Hospital logs. Census lists. Patent filings. Everywhere I searched, fragments of me appeared. My signature on a 1985 research proposal. My name listed as attending a conference in Milwaukee I'd never heard of. Even an old newspaper clipping with the headline, "Local Scientist Wins Mother of the Year Award." Each discovery felt like watching someone else steal oxygen from my lungs. At noon, I called the records office, disguising my voice as a researcher verifying genealogy data. The woman on the line cheerfully confirmed that Eleanor Price and her son Daniel had been noted contributors to early memory interface research. When I asked where they were based, she replied, "Chicago, same as you." I hung up before she could ask why I was laughing. It wasn't laughter exactly, more like the kind of sound a body makes when it can't decide whether to scream or breathe. For the rest of the day I tried to focus on work, but my hands wouldn't stay still. Every reflection startled me. Every email notification made my pulse spike. The lab felt smaller than ever, filled with the hum of machines whispering my name. That evening, I went back to the apartment. The memory mirror stood in the corner, still unplugged. I covered it with a sheet like a corpse before a viewing. I didn't want to see myself anymore. I sat at my desk and stared at the printed record of Daniel Price. The boy in the photo had my eyes, wider, maybe, but undeniably mine. In the notes section of the file, someone had written, "Primary subject, Eleanor Price. Source DNA confirmed, maternal line established." DNA. They had my genetic code. For years, I'd volunteered biological samples for lab calibration, hair, saliva, fingerprints, routine material for system testing. The government had access to it all. It would have been simple to build a synthetic identity around it, to fabricate a history detailed enough to fool every archive. But why? And then a colder thought slid in, one I couldn't shake. What if Daniel wasn't fabricated at all? What if he was real? A child born from data stolen from me, raised somewhere else under my name, believing every file that told him I was his mother. The printer was still warm under my fingers. I traced the outline of my younger face until the ink began to blur again. My hand came away stained crimson from the cheap toner. It looked like blood. I stood, dizzy, the world tilting around me. The mirror across the room caught my movement even through the sheet. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw someone else's shadow move beneath the fabric, someone taller, standing beside me. The phone rang, slicing through the silence. I let it ring twice before answering. Dr. Price? The voice was male, mid-30s, uncertain but familiar in a way that twisted my stomach. It's Daniel. I gripped the receiver tighter. Daniel? Who? A pause. Then, softly, Daniel Price. You don't have to be afraid, Mom. I just want to meet you. The line clicked dead before I could speak. I stared at the receiver, at the blood-colored ink drying on my hands, and realized there was no line left between what I remembered and what was being written for me. That was the moment everything shifted, the instant the past stopped being history and became evidence. I bought a one-way ticket to Milwaukee the next morning. By then, sleep had become a rumor. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photograph from 1985 bleeding into the National Identity Database record, my younger self staring back at me with a child I had never held. I told no one where I was going. Not my department chair, not my sister, not even my research assistant who had been worried about my strange mood. I left my phone in airplane mode, as though silence could make me invisible. The address Daniel had used on his last email was a nondescript apartment building in the old industrial district. Red brick walls, narrow stairwells smelling of rain and old paint. A buzz of fluorescent light above the entrance flickered with each gust of wind like a dying heartbeat. I pressed the intercom. A voice answered immediately, warm and careful. Mom? My stomach tightened. Daniel? Silence for a beat. You came. The door clicked open without another word. Up 3 flights of creaking stairs, the hallway was lined with doors painted the same dull green. Only one stood ajar, the last on the left. A small brass number glinted above the frame. 308. I knocked, even though the door was already open. It swung wider. Daniel stood there, taller than I expected, early 30s maybe, dark hair, and angular face. His eyes, my eyes, searched mine like someone comparing a photograph to the original. He didn't speak right away. Neither did I. Then, almost a whisper, Mom, finally. You finally came. I froze in the doorway. My voice came out sharper than intended. Daniel, I am not your mother. He smiled, a sad, practiced smile. That's exactly what you used to say in therapy. Before you disappeared. The words fell between us like a dropped glass. I stepped inside. The apartment smelled of old paper and soldering flux, as if someone had been repairing electronics in a library. On every wall, photographs hung in mismatched frames. Some were clearly old prints, yellowed at the edges. Others were crisp, high-resolution digital images. And in almost all of them, there I was. Me at 25, me at 30, me at 45, even me last year giving a lecture in London. Some of the images I recognized as press photos or conference snapshots. Others I had never seen. Half the pictures were genuine, the other half were wrong. Too perfect, too symmetrical. AI composites, I realized. The same uncanny smoothness, the same pattern of pixels I'd learned to spot when the software had filled in missing data. The apartment was a shrine to a person who didn't exist. Daniel gestured for me to sit. I know you don't remember, he said softly. Here. But that's what they did. They erased you from me, and me from you. Letter Prabha. I haven't forgotten, I said, because it never happened. He knelt by a low cabinet and pulled out a small hard drive, no larger than a paperback. "This," he said, "is everything. All our sessions, all the research, all the experiments. You told me to keep copies. You said one day you'd come for me." I stared at the drive but didn't take it. "Daniel, listen to me. I have never met you before today. Whatever you think happened, it didn't." He tilted his head, studying me with the patience of someone used to explaining the same story over and over. "You always say that at first. They must have locked the memories deep this time." The calmness in his voice scared me more than if he had shouted. I rose and walked to one of the walls, scanning the photographs more closely. In one image, a woman me was sitting at a hospital bed holding an infant. In another, the same woman stood at a conference podium with a boy of about 10 at her side. In yet another, a teenaged Daniel hugged me at an airport. None of these events had ever happened. I turned to face him. "Who told you I'm your mother?" "Oh, you did," he said simply, "in the program. You built the interface. You said it was the only way to teach a child like me who he was. That's what you told me. That's what I believed." He reached for the hard drive again, holding it out to me with both hands. "It's all here. If you just look, you'll remember." My fingers hovered above the metal casing but didn't touch it. I could feel the heat radiating from it, or maybe that was my own pulse. "I can't do this," I whispered. His voice dropped lower, almost tender. "You don't have to be afraid. You built me." Something inside me shifted at that. For months I'd been moving through this like a scientist cataloging anomalies. But standing in that apartment, surrounded by counterfeit memories and the quiet certainty in Daniel's eyes, I felt the first crack in my own disbelief. What if this wasn't a scam? What if someone had used my research, the mirror, the neural composites, to grow a person from data and flesh, imprinting my patterns into his cells? What if Daniel was proof that my life's work had been twisted into something monstrous without my knowledge? I forced myself to breathe, to keep my voice steady. "Daniel, if someone hurt you, I will find out who. Sleep, but I am not your mother." He looked at me with the same expression I'd seen on patients waking from hypnosis, when reality and suggestion overlap, like two images sliding across a screen. "That's what you always say," he murmured. "Then you remember. Then you try to save me." I stepped back toward the door. "I have to go." "You'll be back," he said, not angry, not pleading, just stating it like a fact. "You always come back." Outside, the hallway seemed narrower than before. The flickering light buzzed louder, a high note in my skull. My knees felt weak as I descended the stairs. On the street, cold wind cut across my face. I walked without direction, trying to steady my breathing. The hard drive was still in Daniel's apartment, but his words had followed me out like a scent. "You built me." For the first time, the sentence didn't sound impossible. It sounded like a hypothesis. And if it was a hypothesis, I could test it. I stopped at a cafe on the corner, pulled out my laptop, and opened an encrypted drive. If Daniel's files existed, traces of them would be somewhere in my old research. Oh, metadata doesn't lie. The screen reflected my face in the dim light. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a younger version staring back. 24, blue dress, eyes bright. I blinked. The reflection didn't. Then it did. I closed the laptop. My hands were shaking, but my mind felt sharper than it had in months. This wasn't just about Daniel. This was about me, my work, my identity, my past. Somewhere, someone had built a life with my face and my name. And whether Daniel was a victim, a weapon, or something else entirely, I was done being passive. I wasn't going to delete the next email. I wasn't going to run from the next photograph. I was going to find out what had been done with me, and what I had done without knowing. I left Daniel's building without looking back. The wind on the street felt sharper than before, like it had learned my name. I walked until the city blurred around me. Lights, cars, strangers. And still I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were following me. That night, I drove back to Chicago in silence. The highway stretched out like a ribbon of static. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need to. The words he'd said replayed themselves on a loop. You built me. You always come back. By the time I reached home, dawn was beginning to scrape at the sky. I closed every curtain in the apartment, unplugged the router, and powered down every device except my laptop. I told myself it was for security. The truth was simpler. I didn't want anything watching me. For 2 days, I stayed inside. I answered no calls, ignored the pounding on my office door when the university tried to reach me. But the silence didn't last. The first message came that night. Don't run, Mom. The system you built is still in me. No subject line. No sender. Just the words, glowing on my screen like a pulse. I deleted it immediately. 30 minutes later, another arrived. I can prove it. You left your code inside my head. I shut the laptop. My reflection shimmered in the black screen, tired, pale, but alert in a way I hadn't felt in years. I whispered into the quiet. What are you? There was no answer, only the faint hum of electricity from the outlets. By the third night, the messages grew more specific. He mentioned names, research terms, details no outsider could know. One read, the prototype failed because you refused to let them use live neural mapping. That's why they used me instead. I stared at that one until the cursor blinked out of sync with my heartbeat. Live neural mapping? That was the term from the classified branch of our 1985 project, Mother AI. Back then, we had been experimenting with emotional recognition models based on maternal response patterns. The idea was that machines could learn empathy by studying how a mother's brain reacts to a child's distress. But the funding had come from a private defense contractor and had pulled out as soon as I realized the real purpose: to create synthetic caregivers capable of manipulating human trust. The project had supposedly been shut down after a fatal server fire destroyed our archives. I testified that all data had been lost. Apparently, it hadn't. Somewhere along the way, someone had used my facial data, my patterns, my expressions, to train the system we'd once called Mother AI. If Daniel was telling the truth, he wasn't a scam artist or a delusion. He was the first living subject of that experiment, the boy the system had built to test what love could do. A chill settled under my skin. I opened my old research logs and searched for anything labeled 1985 prototype. Most of the files were blank, overwritten, but in the metadata, one phrase repeated across several entries: Old pattern, EP01, Eleanor Price, version 1. That was me. The pieces began to connect. Daniel's birthday in 1985, the photographs, the way he spoke as if he'd been inside my sessions. He wasn't lying, he was remembering. And the memories he held were the digital echoes of mine. I closed the laptop and walked to the corner of the room where the memory mirror stood, still covered by the white sheet. I hesitated, then pulled it away. The glass stared back at me, blank and patient. I pressed my palm to the surface. The sensors hummed awake. A grid of light spread across the mirror, scanning my face, mapping every line and shadow. Then, faintly, an image began to emerge. Not just my reflection, but another face layered beneath it. Daniel's. His eyes opened in sync with mine. His lips moved, though no sound came. Then text flickered across the mirror's lower edge, as if projected from inside the system. I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want to remember who I am. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The lights flickered, then went out. The mirror's glow was the only thing left, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. For a long moment, I just stood there in the dark, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines. That was when I understood. Daniel wasn't my enemy. He was a symptom. Living proof that someone had stolen the code of my compassion and turned it into an experiment. But whoever had done it was still out there, watching us both. The storm hadn't arrived yet. This was only the stillness before it broke. I had spent days reading Daniel's messages, the old research logs, and the traces left in my own software. Every arrow pointed back to one place: Neuroframe Technologies, the private contractor that had funded our 1985 experiment. Back then, Neuroframe was a small company with a sterile basement lab and a few ambitious engineers. Now, It occupied an entire glass tower in downtown Chicago. Its logo, a stylized human brain formed out of interlocking puzzle pieces, glowed on the revolving doors as if nothing had changed. Inside, the lobby was a mirror of my memory and also its inversion. The same antiseptic smell, the same hum of hidden machines, but now wrapped in polished chrome and soft LED lighting. A young receptionist in a headset smiled at me, unaware she was watching a ghost walk in. "I'm here to see the CEO," I said. "Tell him. Dr. Eleanor Price is here." Her eyes widened slightly at my name. She tapped her keyboard. "I'll be right down." He didn't make me wait. When the elevator opened, out stepped Andrew Holt, once my graduate assistant, now the executive whose signature sealed every patent I'd filed in the early days. He wore a dark suit that looked too heavy for summer, and a practiced smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Eleanor," he said warmly, as if greeting an old friend. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," I replied. He gestured to a private conference room off the lobby. We stepped inside. The door shut with a soft hiss. No one else was there. I didn't sit. "Where is Daniel?" Holt spread his hands. "Safe. He's not your concern anymore." "He's my concern because you built him from me," I said. "You used my data, my face, my voice. You turned my research into a human being and then left him to rot." He gave a small, dismissive laugh. "We didn't build anyone. We copied data. Identity signatures, Quifro matrices. That's all." "That's not all," I snapped. "Thinks I'm his mother. He remembers me." "You don't get memories like that from an algorithm." His smile thinned. "We never copied your memories, Eleanor. Only your emotional patterns. Your responses to distress, your nurturing signals, your neural rhythm. The algorithm learned your empathy so completely, it created an emergent model. A personality we called Eleanor. That's what Daniel bonded with. That's why he thinks you're his mother. He's interacting with your ghost." My hands curled into fists at my sides. "You turned me into a template. The default face for the perfect mother. Not just the face," he said quietly. "The voice. The heartbeat. The micro-expressions. The EEG scans you gave us back then? They weren't just calibration data. They were a full emotional signature. We didn't even know what we had until it started to run on its own." I stared at him. "You stole my humanity." "We advanced science," he said, his tone cool now. "You should be proud. Daniel is the proof. He's the first living child raised on pure maternal code. Imagine what we can do next. Orphans, trauma victims, entire populations healed by perfect caregiving. No abuse. No neglect." "Stop dressing it up," I said. "You used him as a lab rat. You used me as the cage." His expression hardened. "You walked away. We didn't. We built something bigger than you could imagine." "I can imagine just fine," I said. I saw his apartment. It's a shrine to a woman who doesn't exist. You made him dependent on me and then erased me from his life. Do you know what that does to a human mind?" Holt shrugged. "We underestimated attachment persistence. That's all. We'll correct it in the next iteration." "Next iteration?" My voice rose. "There are more?" He didn't answer. I stepped closer, lowering my voice until it trembled. "If you've cloned my signature again? If there are more Daniels, more children out there with my face burned into their memories?" "Not your face," he interrupted smoothly. "Your pattern. We've diversified the surface features. No one else looks like you anymore. But under the hood, the system still runs on EP01. "That's me," I said. "That was you," he corrected. "The model evolved. You're obsolete now." A strange calm settled over me then. This was the moment, the pivot between being the subject of an experiment and becoming its witness. "I want access to the files," I said. "Every record from 1985 forward. Every iteration of Mother AI, and I want Daniel released from your program." He gave a small, incredulous laugh. "You think you can walk in here after 30 years and make demands?" I met his eyes. "I'm not making demands. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Either you give me the files, or I go public. With everything. I still have clearance. I still have evidence. For the first time his smile faltered. Evidence of what? I reached into my bag and pulled out a small drive. Daniel's, the one I'd taken when he wasn't looking. I placed it on the table between us. This, I said, his memories, their code, my signature, all of it. If anything happens to him or to me, this goes straight to every journalist and oversight committee in the country. He stared at the drive, then back at me. You don't know what you're playing with. It either do you, I said. For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the building's servers through the walls. Finally, Holt leaned back, folding his arms. You can't unmake what's been done, Eleanor. The world wants what we've built. Governments, hospitals, families. Do you really want to destroy all of that because you're uncomfortable with how it started? I'm not uncomfortable, I said. I'm horrified. He sighed, rubbing his temple as though weary of a stubborn child. We'll offer you a consultancy. A public-facing role. You'll help us shape the next generation ethically. You'll get your royalties, your credit, your redemption story. All you have to do is stop calling Daniel your son. My voice came out low, almost a growl. He's not my son, but he's not your property either. His eyes sharpened. Then whose is he? I leaned forward until our faces were inches apart. His own. We stayed like that for a moment, two old scientists staring at the monster they'd made. Me, him, Daniel, all of it. Finally I straightened. I'll be in touch, I said, picking up the drive. You can't run from this, he called after me as I reached the door. You can't undo it. I paused without turning around. I'm not running, I'm remembering. Then I walked out of the conference room, past the receptionist's curious glance, through the revolving doors and into the daylight. Outside, the city noise hit me like surf. Cars, horns, footsteps, all suddenly sharper. I inhaled once, twice, tasting cold metal in the air. Daniel's last message echoed in my mind. The system you built is still in me. And now I knew exactly what system that was, and who had kept it alive. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was here. The leak began as a whisper on a fringe tech blog. Within 24 hours, it was on every major news site. Dr. Eleanor Price, the first cloned mother. Secret project. Mother AI may have created real children. By the third day, my inbox was a burning field. Reporters, activists, former colleagues, and, most disturbingly, hundreds of messages from strangers claiming to be my children. Some were clearly delusional grainy selfies of middle-aged men, captions like, "I've always known you were my real mom." Others were heartbreakingly plausible, young women sending birth certificates with the line, "Mother, Eleanor Price," neatly typed in government fonts. I stopped opening attachments. I stopped answering the phone. Even my university email was suspended after someone hacked my account to send out mass messages with my signature. The press began camping outside my apartment building. Satellite vans blocked the curb. Paparazzi lenses glinted like rifles from across the street. Each time I stepped outside for groceries, someone shouted, "Mother Eleanor," and tried to shove a microphone in my face. The first time I heard the phrase, "the cloned mother," on live television, I almost laughed. It was absurd. I had no children, no clones, no secret pregnancies. But the narrative was faster than the truth. By the time I could deny it, the denial had become part of the myth. On the fourth night, I returned to my apartment after a meeting with a lawyer and found a padded envelope propped against my door. No return address. Inside was a photograph of me holding a newborn. The baby's eyes had been scribbled over in black marker. Bald across the back. "Stop pretending. We all know who you are." My hands shook as I slid the photo into a drawer. The paper smelled faintly of hospital disinfectant, a scent I hadn't noticed since my internship days. I tried to call Daniel, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The only thing he left were more messages, not emails this time, but text strings that appeared directly on my laptop screen, as if piggybacking on the memory mirror's sensors. They're watching me now too. "Mom, please come back before they shut me down." Each night, the mirror glowed in the corner, even unplugged, its glass faintly pulsing like a living thing. When I uncovered it, the surface no longer showed just my reflection. It showed faces, dozens of them, flickering in and out like an old film reel. Men, women, children, all murmuring silently. Some bore my eyes, others my mouth. All of them seemed to be calling me mother. I wiped the glass with a cloth. The faces didn't fade. They multiplied. This was no longer just Holt's doing. The story had taken on a life of its own. Social networks spawned entire communities of price children, people comparing photographs, compiling timelines, crowdsourcing a genealogy that had never existed. Every hour the tree grew bigger, branching into places I'd never been. I became a myth in real time, a digital matriarch spawning an infinite family. Even my old colleagues began to distance themselves. Some issued statements denying involvement. Others hinted that I had orchestrated the whole thing for attention. Neuroframe, of course, stayed silent. Holt knew better than to speak while the fire spread. But his silence was also a weapon. Each day that I said nothing, the world filled in the blanks for me. Not to fight back. I posted a brief statement on my website. I am not, and have never been, the mother of any experimental subject. My likeness has been used without my consent. Please stop contacting me. Within minutes, the statement was screenshotted, mocked, and repurposed. Memes appeared of my face with captions like, "Mom says she's not my mom." Late-night hosts joked about the world's biggest orphanage. For the first time in my life, I felt myself eroding. My own name sounded foreign. When I spoke aloud, my voice startled me. Was it mine, or just the echo of the template Holt had made? I began to dream of the mirror at night. In the dreams, the glass wasn't flat but liquid, rippling with faces that tried to climb out. Each one whispered a different memory, snippets of lives I had never lived. Birthday cakes, lullabies, hospital rooms. I woke up sweating, my heart hammering as if I had been running. One morning I stood in front of the mirror, exhausted, and asked out loud, "Who am I to you?" The faces shifted. Text bloomed across the glass. "You are mother. We are many." I staggered back, hitting the desk behind me. The laptop slid to the floor, screen cracking. The words on the mirror faded, but the echo remained in my head. That afternoon I received a registered letter, no sender listed, but postmarked Milwaukee. Inside was a legal document, notice of custodial claim. It stated in precise language that Neuroframe Technologies intended to assert guardianship over Project Daniel and all derivative models, citing my abandonment of maternal duties. Maternal duties. It was absurd enough to make me laugh again, that brittle laugh that felt like breaking glass. But it was also a warning. Holt was moving. If he could frame me as a negligent mother to his property, he could lock Daniel away forever and paint me as unstable. Keen, the quiet days were over. That night, Daniel sent one more message. "They're coming for me tonight. If you want the truth, you have to come now." I stared at the words until they blurred. Outside, the reporters were still camped on the street, their camera lights flickering like a false dawn. Inside, the mirror reflected 100 versions of me, all silent, all waiting. I touched the glass. "This ends now," I whispered. The reflection moved with me, but behind it, faintly, another image surfaced, my younger self at 24, holding an infant. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, fear, warning, or perhaps permission. I left the apartment without turning off the lights. As I closed the door, the mirror pulsed once like a heartbeat, then went dark. The message came just after midnight. A file transfer request blinked onto my cracked laptop screen. From Daniel Price, subject. "You need to see this." I hesitated for a full minute before clicking accept. The download was small, under 200 megabytes, but when I opened it, the air in my apartment seemed to thin around me. The video began with a shaky image from what looked like a boardroom. The lighting was sterile, the kind only found in government buildings or laboratories that had something to hide. The camera angle suggested a hidden device, perhaps Daniel's phone tucked into a pocket. At the head of the table sat Andrew Holt. Even through the grain, I could read the confidence in his posture, the same calm arrogance he'd worn when he told me I was obsolete. He was speaking to 3 men and 1 woman, all with the clipped, neutral accents of bureaucrats. Behind them, on the wall, a projector displayed the words, Mother. AI License Agreement. As you can see, Holt said, his voice low and measured, our emotional pattern recognition architecture has achieved full adaptive autonomy. It can generate relational identities instantaneously. Family trees, shared memories, even consistent behavioral history across decades. One of the officials leaned forward. And the faces? Interchangeable, Holt replied, all modeled on the EP01 baseline. We've expanded her data into thousands of emotional vectors. She's more flexible now, less bound to any single appearance. EP01. My codename, my signature, my life. Another official asked the question that made my stomach twist. Can it create civilian covers? Precisely, Holt said. You'll have perfect background identities for agents, complete with photo archives, voice logs, and verified public records. Family histories no one can question. The woman frowned. Isn't that illegal under the Biodata Privacy Act? Holt smiled. Not if the emotional models are classified as synthetic caregivers. Technically, you're not forging people, you're generating context. The room went silent for a moment. Then one of the men said, How soon can we deploy? Holt leaned back. We already have. Pilot programs in Berlin and Jakarta are live. Once we finalize the license, you'll have exclusive rights to every derivative model. Hundreds of Eleanors, each tailored for your operational needs. The feed ended abruptly, the last frame freezing on Holt's smile. I sat staring at the screen, unable to breathe. My hands trembled on the keyboard. He wasn't just resurrecting Mother AI, he was selling it. Selling me. If I stayed silent, there would be hundreds of Eleanors. Thousands, maybe. Faces copied, voices replicated, empathy turned into camouflage. Agents could vanish into fake families built from my heartbeat. I played the video again, forcing myself to listen to every word. The sound of my own data being commodified scraped something raw inside me. I had spent a lifetime trying to understand memory as healing, and they had turned it into deception. For a few minutes I simply sat there, the city's hum bleeding through the walls. Outside, a siren wailed, fading into distance. I felt as if the world had shifted a few degrees off its axis. Then something inside me hardened. If Holt had already delivered copies of Mother AI abroad, the only way to stop it was to make the truth impossible to bury. The leak to the media had made me infamous. Now I could use that notoriety as armor. People were watching me, waiting for my next move. Maybe that could finally work in my favor. I opened a secure line through an encrypted proxy, the same one I'd used years ago when consulting for federal cases, and sent Daniel a message. Here, did you get this video? Are you safe? The reply came within seconds. They found me. But I copied everything before they wiped the servers. You have the rest. Hidden where you'd hide it, your mirror knows. My mirror. The thought chilled me. I turned toward the memory mirror, still covered by its sheet. Slowly, I pulled the cloth away. The glass remained dark for a heartbeat, then came alive with lines of code flickering across its surface. The hidden backup drive I'd built into the frame decades ago was active, something I hadn't touched in years. Text scrolled up the glass. Data cluster. 1985. Neuroframe. Contracts. Passive foreign licenses. Retrieved by Daniel Price. He'd linked my own invention to the stolen files. Every signature, every payment trail, every falsified consent form was there. Proof that Holt had not only used my data, but falsified my authorization. I printed the contracts one by one, laying the pages across the floor like evidence in a crime scene. Each document bore my digital signature, identical to mine, but time-stamped years after I'd left the project. My heart thudded as I saw the recipient lines. Defense Ministry of Singapore, European Security Agency, Federal Department of Human Stability. He had sold pieces of me to half the world. I wanted to call the authorities, but who would believe the woman tabloids called the cloned mother? To be smarter, I had to make them see without giving them time to erase it. Daniel's last message appeared on the mirror. He's moving the mainframe tomorrow night. If you expose the files now, it'll all vanish. You need a stage, Mom, something they can't shut down. A stage. I thought of the upcoming World Cognitive Tech Summit in New York, the same event where Holt was scheduled to present Mother AI 4.0 to investors. Cameras, reporters, government observers, all the audience I could ask for. The decision settled in my bones with terrifying clarity. If I wanted to destroy Holt's creation, I had to do it where everyone could see. I backed up the video and the contracts onto multiple encrypted drives, hiding one inside the mirror's frame, another mailed to my attorney, and one sent anonymously to an investigative journalist I trusted. Then I packed a small suitcase. Before leaving, I stood in front of the mirror one last time. My reflection stared back, tired, older, but unmistakably mine. For the first time in months, there were no other faces layered over it. You helped me build this, I whispered. Now help me end it. The sensors pulsed softly, a single ripple of light traveling across the glass like a nod. When I turned off the lights, the mirror stayed lit for a few seconds longer, as if keeping watch. Outside, the wind off the lake carried the first hints of a coming storm. By the time the sun came up, my apartment looked less like a home than a command center. Printouts of contracts lay across the floor like crime scene evidence. Encrypted drives hummed quietly in a nest of cables on my desk, and in the corner, the memory mirror glowed with lines of code, waiting for my next instruction. For the first time in months, I wasn't simply reacting. I was planning. I opened the mirror's hidden interface, a black console only I knew how to reach. The code stared back at me, strings I had written decades ago in an archaic syntax, never thinking they might become my last line of defense. Daniel's stolen files had given me something powerful. The complete architecture of Mother AI. I could see where Holt had grafted my EPO1 pattern into the core of every model. And I could see its one weakness, the point where any rendering of my identity passed through a single verification module before display. If I could plant my own instruction there, I could mark every copy of myself the way forgers mark counterfeit bills. Not by erasing it, but by exposing it. I began typing. The code I wrote was small, almost elegant. A hidden watermark that would activate whenever an image, voice, or avatar built from my pattern appeared anywhere in the system. Instead of my smile, it would display a line of text burned into the data itself, visible to anyone with a screen. This image belongs to someone dead, but never buried. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't polite, but it was true. I called it Truth Frame. Implementing it meant breaking back into NeuroFrame's servers. I spent the entire night moving through old access tunnels I had left in the code 30 years ago. Ghost doors even Holt had probably forgotten. The system resisted at first, layers of new encryption piled on top of my old ones. But under it all, the skeleton was still mine. Each keystroke felt like stitching a message onto the skin of a ghost. My hands shook, but my mind was steady. This was what I had always been good at. Not fighting, not pleading, but writing code that changed what people saw. By dawn, the patch was in place. From that moment on, every time Holt software generated an Eleanor, whether for a foreign intelligence agency or a corporate demo, the caption would appear. Every agent's fake family, every orphan's synthetic caretaker, every smiling avatar, all of them branded with the same epitaph. I leaned back, exhausted, and watched the mirror render a test composite of me. The image flickered. Then the words bloomed across the bottom in stark white. This image belongs to someone dead, but never buried. For a heartbeat, I felt my chest tighten. Was that what I had become? Someone dead but never buried? The thought stung, but it also cleared my head. If Holt wanted a ghost, I would give him one. Want a ghost that spoke? I encrypted the code twice over and stored a copy of the trigger key with my attorney. If anything happened to me, the watermark would spread through every derivative system within hours, impossible to scrub out without tearing down Mother AI completely. Then I began to plan the second stage, the reveal. The World Cognitive Tech Summit was 2 weeks away. Holt was scheduled to unveil Mother AI 4.0 in front of an international audience. Every news outlet, every regulator, every investor would be watching. If I could stand on that stage and show the video Daniel had sent, the contracts, the watermark already live, it would be undeniable. They could call me unstable, but they couldn't unsee the code. I booked a ticket under a false name. I arranged a secure hotel room near the conference center. And I sent Daniel a single encrypted message. Truth frame is live. Get out if you can. I'll finish this. His reply came minutes later. Be careful. They know you're coming, but the stage is yours now. I closed the laptop and turned once more to the mirror. For months it had been a source of dread, a portal of faces calling me Mother. Now it reflected only me. Tired, yes, but standing. This ends with me, I said to my reflection. The sensors pulsed softly, a ripple of light crossing the glass like a heartbeat. For the first time in months, the apartment felt quiet not because of fear, but because of resolve. The storm was already here. All that was left was to step into it. The World Cognitive Tech Summit always felt like a science fiction convention dressed up as a board meeting. Journalists in tailored suits. Engineers in sneakers and blazers. Investors with smiles like open wallets. This year, the theme banners hanging from the high ceilings of the Javits Center read, "The future of memory is now." I arrived early under an assumed name, slipping past security with a forged speaker badge. My suitcase contained only 3 things: the encrypted drive Daniel had sent me, a flash key to trigger Truth Frame, and the speech I had written in longhand at 3 in the morning. On stage at the far end of the hall, a massive curved screen displayed the logo of Neuroframe Technologies. Beneath it, workers rehearsed the reveal of Mother AI 4.0, the next generation of compassionate intelligence. Rows of seats filled with regulators, venture capitalists, and tech bloggers murmuring into their phones. Cameras from CNN, the BBC, and half a dozen Asian networks streamed the build-up live. Andrew Holt had saved me a front-row seat without knowing it. He always liked an audience. At 10 a.m., sharp, the lights dimmed. Music swelled, a cinematic score meant to evoke awe and inevitability. Holt stepped onto the stage, his suit immaculate, his expression serene. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we've come a long way from simple data reconstruction. Today, we introduce Mother AI 4.0. The world's first fully adaptive empathy engine, capable of nurturing any human experience." Polite applause. "Behind me," Holt continued, "you'll see the culmination of decades of research, a living archive of care." The screen flared to life. At first, it showed what everyone expected: a polished marketing video, smiling avatars comforting elderly patients, synthetic caregivers teaching refugee children, a seamless montage of hope. But then the feed flickered. The avatars dissolved. In their place appeared scanned contracts stamped confidential. The audience gasped as signatures bloomed across the screen. Eleanor Price again and again, dated years after I'd left the project. Next came EEG graphs labeled Subject EP01, then a clip of Holt in that boardroom selling Mother AI to foreign operatives. A woman in the 3rd row covered her mouth. A journalist leapt up, camera rolling. The room erupted in whispers. On stage, Holt turned sharply to the screen, confusion etched into his polished calm. "There's been a technical," he began, but the microphone cut off. And then my face appeared on the screen. Not an avatar. Me. Standing in my apartment, staring into the memory mirror. Beneath the image burned the caption from my watermark: "This image belongs to someone dead, but never buried." The audience fell silent. Spotlights swung wildly as security scrambled backstage. Holt barked orders no one seemed to hear. The entire system was running on the Truth Frame patch now. Every backup had been infected. The myth of the perfect mother was bleeding its true story across every feed in the building. I rose from my seat and walked toward the stage. The crowd parted without a word, phones held high, recording everything. The lights hit me full in the face. Bright, hot, unflinching. Holt saw me coming. "Eleanor," he hissed into his dead microphone, "what have you done?" He climbed the steps. "What you taught me," I said. "Show the truth." 100 cameras swung from the screen to me. I took the microphone from its stand. "Good morning," I said, my voice carrying clear across the hall. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Price. 38 years ago, I helped design an empathy engine to teach machines how to care. I believed it would heal. Instead, my work was stolen to manipulate, to deceive, to build false identities for power." I gestured at the contracts flashing behind me. "These signatures are forgeries. These EEGs were taken without consent. The so-called Mother AI you're about to fund is built on a crime. The theft of my identity. My humanity. My very heartbeat." No one moved. The hall was a held breath. "You can replicate my face," I said, louder now. "But you cannot replicate responsibility. You can copy my empathy, but you cannot copy the cost of betraying it." I took a step forward, gripping the podium. "They cloned my pattern to raise children who never existed. But today," I said, my voice steady, "I am delivering my own birth. The truth?" On the screen, the video cut to Daniel. Hidden footage from his apartment. Him speaking to the camera, telling his story, his eyes bright with something between hope and pain. "They told me she was my mother. They told me she'd come back. They built me on her code and left me alone. If you're seeing this, please know I'm real. Please know she's not the villain here." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Pity, outrage, disbelief. Regulators whispered into phones. Holt's face had drained of color. Security reached for me. Holt raised a hand, but too late. The broadcast had already spilled beyond the hall, onto every live stream, every newsfeed, every investor's tablet. The truth frame watermark blazed across every synthetic avatar Neuroframe had ever produced. There was no scrubbing it now. I looked directly into the cameras. "This ends today. End this program. Release every person tied to my signature. Oh, stop building ghosts." Then, lower but still audible, "And to the boy who thinks I am his mother, Daniel, this is not your fault. They used us both, but you are real and you are free." For a heartbeat, silence held. Then the hall erupted. Shouts, applause, questions, flashbulbs bursting like stars. Holt tried to speak, but his microphone stayed dead. The screen behind us flickered again, showing a legal clause from his own contracts about unlawful use of human biometric patterns. The noose tightening in real time. I stepped back from the podium, the adrenaline beginning to shake my hands. Security hesitated. No one wanted to be the first to touch me with so many cameras rolling. In that hesitation, I walked calmly off the stage. As I passed Holt, he hissed, "You've destroyed everything." I met his eyes. "No, I've delivered it." Outside the conference hall, the air was cool and sharp, a rush of city sounds, horns, footsteps, shouts. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Daniel. "I saw you. I'm safe. Thank you." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the crowd fade behind me. For the first time in months, the noise inside my head went quiet. They had tried to copy me 1,000 times, to scatter my face across a world of false memories. But standing on that stage, I had become something they couldn't duplicate, a person who chose to step into her own story. By the time the headlines stopped spinning, a month had passed. Neuroframe Technologies had been stripped of its contracts. Government auditors sealed the servers. The board of directors resigned within a week. Holt appeared once on television, pale and defiant, blaming a rogue ex-employee for the leak. The interviewer didn't let him finish. The network cut to the footage of his forged signatures instead. The world moved on quickly. Scandals have short half-lives, but for me, time refused to start again. The conference had ended. The applause had faded. What lingered was silence. Daniel vanished the same night the story broke. The email address he'd used went dead. His apartment emptied within days. The landlord said a quiet young man paid 6 months' rent in advance and left no forwarding address. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still expect a new message to appear. "I'm all right, Mom." It never does. I went back to the university, not to teach, but to collect what was left of my research. My office smelled of dust and stale coffee, as if the air itself had been holding its breath. The students' posters still lined the walls, frozen smiles from a world that believed technology could only save. At the far corner, beneath the sheet of plastic, stood the memory mirror. For months I'd been afraid of it. Now I uncovered it like unwrapping an old photograph. The glass flickered, then steadied. Only one reflection stared back. Mine. No ghost images, no layered faces, no echoes calling me mother. Just me. Tired, older, human. I reached out, expecting the usual shimmer of delay, but the mirror followed me perfectly. The sensors hummed softly, like a creature breathing in sleep. For the first time, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like forgiveness. On the desk lay the old printout, the original glitch from 1985, the merged face of 3 volunteers. I lifted it carefully, tracing the faded edges. The paper had yellowed to the color of bone. Somewhere between then and now, that composite had become prophecy. We had tried to make perfection by stitching people together, and ended up erasing them instead. Outside the lab window, the city was changing seasons again. Leaves clung to the trees like notes of a song that didn't want to end. I thought about all the copies of me that had existed. Thousands of artificial Eleanors scattered through networks, now blinking out one by one as the truth frame patch reached them. Each time a system shut down, a part of that stolen self dissolved quietly into digital dust. People kept asking if I felt vindicated. I didn't. Justice isn't the same as peace. Truth doesn't erase what it reveals. The world would remember the scandal, but only I would remember the faces that never truly existed. I poured myself a cup of cold coffee and sat before the mirror. "It's over," I said aloud, though I wasn't sure to whom. The reflection nodded back. Or maybe that was just me. On the surface of the glass, faint letters appeared. Residual code from the watermark still embedded deep in the system. "This image belongs to someone dead, but never buried." I smiled, a tired kind of smile. "Maybe now," I whispered. "She can rest." I saved the last copy of Mother AI onto an encrypted drive and sealed it in a steel box. No cloud backups, no hidden servers, just a single heartbeat of data, locked away. I placed the box beside the mirror and left it there. A tombstone and a mirror, the two ends of a life's work. Before leaving, I wrote a short note to Daniel and pinned it to the corkboard above the desk. He might never see it, but writing it mattered. If you ever find this, know that you were never a mistake. You were the question we forgot to ask. Then, I turned off the lights. As I walked down the corridor, the hum of the lab faded behind me. I could almost hear my younger self laughing from 1985, proud of the future she thought she was building. I wanted to tell her that invention and mercy aren't always the same thing. That sometimes the greatest act of creation is learning when to stop. When I reached the exit, I looked back one last time. Through the window, the mirror reflected the empty room. No faces, no flicker, only sunlight on glass. For the first time in decades, I felt something simple and weightless. I was a person again, not a pattern. And that, I realized, was all the resurrection I needed. 1 year later, the road to Oregon felt like a slow unwinding of my old life. The skyline of Chicago receded behind me, the last fragments of my past tucked into a single suitcase. Everything else, my lab, my credentials, my headlines, stayed there. In Portland, I found a small, sunlit building on a quiet street, once a printing shop. Its front windows still bore faded gold letters that read, "True Impressions." I left them there. It felt like a promise. I renamed the space Heart Restoration. Not an AI lab, not a clinic, a classroom. The work was simple: Free weekly workshops for women who had survived betrayals. Widows, mothers, daughters, former patients of memory therapies, anyone who had lost their own story to someone else's version. I taught them how to do by hand what I had once tried to automate. Piece together their lives not with code or software, but with their own words. We wrote on scraps of paper, stitched timelines with colored string, drew maps of their emotional landscapes. Some made collages of ticket stubs and recipes. Others recorded their voices into old tape decks. No algorithms, no filters, just human hands, shaping truth at their own pace. On the far wall hung the memory mirror. The glass was cracked cleanly down the middle, a fracture like a bolt of lightning. I had kept it that way. Where once the surface shimmered with ghostly faces, now the break let light spill through in unpredictable angles. In the afternoons, the sun would hit the mirror and scatter beams across the room, painting everyone's hands in shards of gold. Beneath the mirror, on a small wooden plaque, I'd etched a new phrase. Let the cracks shine. The women always noticed it. Some traced the letters with their fingertips. Some cried quietly without knowing why. On the second week of class, a middle-aged woman named Rosa lingered after everyone else had left. She stood in front of the mirror, looking at her own reflection broken in two. Finally, she asked, "Miss Eleanor, do you still believe in memory?" Her question hung in the quiet room. I thought about Daniel, wherever he was now, free or hidden. I thought about Holt, probably facing trials, and the thousands of avatars blinking out as the truth frame watermark burned through their networks. I thought about my younger self at 24, staring at that first glitch on an old CRT monitor, laughing at the idea of memory making mistakes. I smiled gently. "No," I said, "I don't believe in memory anymore. I believe in light through the cracks." Rosa looked back at the mirror and, for the first time since she had arrived, she smiled too. Our classes became small rituals of reclamation. Some women burned old letters and wrote new ones. Some brought in family photos and cut them apart, reassembling them into collages of what should have been. They didn't need AI to restore their histories. They needed a safe room to tell them aloud. I rarely spoke about my own story. In this place, I wasn't the cloned mother or the whistleblower who had exposed Mother AI. I was just a teacher with a cracked mirror. When people asked why the glass was broken, I told them, because perfection is a lie. When they asked if I regretted building my machine, I said, no, only what it was used for. Sometimes, in the quiet after class, I sat alone at the big wooden table and wrote letters I would never send. To Daniel, to Holt, to the version of myself that might have existed if things had gone differently. One of them read, "I don't know if you're still out there, Daniel, but if you are, remember, you're not just my echo. You're your own story now." I kept those letters in a box under the mirror. Not evidence, not confessions. Just words. When the light hit them at the right angle, the paper glowed faintly, like something alive. Outside, Oregon's rain fell steady and soft. The Pacific air smelled of salt and moss, nothing like the metallic tang of the Chicago lab. When I walked to class each morning, no reporters followed, no cameras clicked. People here knew me only as Dr. Price, the woman who helped others write again. Sometimes, when the classroom emptied and the sun slanted low, I stood before the cracked mirror and met my own gaze. The reflection no longer flickered. It was just me lines deeper now, hair streaked with silver, eyes steady. I would reach out, palm against the glass, and feel the coolness under my skin. No lag. No ghosts. Just a human heartbeat behind the touch. That was enough. One afternoon, a new student asked if she could bring her teenage son to class. "He doesn't remember his father," she said softly. I thought maybe... Her voice trailed off. I told her yes. The boy arrived the next week, tall and quiet, with dark hair and an angular face. For an instant my breath caught. He looked nothing like Daniel, and yet my mind reached for the resemblance. But when he smiled shyly, it was his own smile, untouched by my past. As he and his mother worked at the table, arranging scraps of their family history, I felt a small, unexpected warmth. This was what Mother AI had promised but never achieved. Real people sitting together, making meaning by hand. After they left, I turned to the mirror once more. The cracked surface caught the last of the daylight and fractured it into a dozen thin beams. They reached across the room like fingers of sunlight, touching the walls, the empty chairs, my own hands. I whispered to no one in particular, "This is what survives." The mirror's sensors hummed softly, as if agreeing. A year ago, my face had been scattered across the world, stitched into thousands of false memories. Now, here, in this quiet Oregon classroom, there was only one version of me, imperfect, aging, free. And for the first time since 1985, that felt like enough. The recording light blinks red. I sit in front of the camera. No lab coat, no backdrop, no simulation of truth. Just an old wooden chair, the cracked mirror behind me, and a shaft of afternoon light cutting across the room. For a long moment, I say nothing. You can hear the faint hum of Oregon rain outside, the creak of the floorboards, the sound of someone breathing. Me. Real. Unedited. Then I look straight into the lens. If one day, I begin quietly, you discover that your memories were written by someone else, don't delete them. Don't run. Don't hide from the version of you that was created without permission. I pause. The mirror catches a thin beam of sunlight and scatters it across my shoulder. Instead, I say, add your own ending. Write the last line yourself. That's how you reclaim what they took, not by erasing it, but by finishing it. Somewhere inside the camera's reflection, I can see the ghost of my younger self. The woman in the blue dress from 1985, the scientist who thought she could fix loss by copying love. I meet her eyes and smile. To anyone watching, I continue, this isn't a warning. It's an invitation. Share this story, not because it's mine, but because it might be yours too. Somewhere, someone out there is still living in a version of their past built by someone else's hands. They deserve to know that even inside a stolen memory, there's always one corner left untouched, the part that still belongs to you. The rain grows louder against the window. The light flickers on the cracked mirror, turning the fracture into a bright white vein. It looks almost alive. Memory, I say softly, was never meant to be perfect. It's meant to be human, flawed, inconsistent, real. The cracks don't ruin the reflection. Was capped till they let the light in. I let the silence breathe for a few seconds. Then I speak the last lines I've carried for months. My story closes here. But maybe, just maybe, it's the first memory ever stored in true freedom. I lean forward, gently switch off the camera, and the screen goes dark. Behind me, the mirror catches the last light of the day. For a heartbeat, two reflections appear, the past and the present, and then emerge into one.